What's up, everybody, and welcome in to another edition of the Sit Down. As always, if you enjoy this video, please make sure you hit that like button and let me know what you think of today's very interesting discussion in the comment section below. If you're new around here, you just haven't done it yet, or you're living under a rock and seeing this video for the first time, I don't know what you're waiting for. Hit that subscribe button below now so you never miss another Sit Down video. If you're currently listening to us on iTunes, Google Podcasts, or Spotify, welcome in. I hope you enjoy this episode as well. Please make sure you leave us a detailed review and a 5-star rating. As always, we are presented by Pravada Cigar Club. Get your signature sit-down cigar available now. The link to buy is in the description of this audio and video. What's up, everybody, and welcome in. This is episode 154 of the show, and as I celebrated on YouTube over the weekend, we are near our 3-year anniversary of the audio of this show. First thing we ever did was audio way back in April of 2021, and many of you remember, first episode we ever did was Vincent the Chin Gigante. We never knew where this show would end up going, but here we are, and I couldn't thank all of you enough for your support. Since then, we've been able to build up the audio. We get, hundreds of thousands of listens a week and then on a monthly basis. From a video side on YouTube, we have 72,000 plus subscribers, tens of millions of views. We've been able to build up a TikTok with over 170,000 subscribers. I couldn't be more proud of what we've been able to do here on the show, and I really appreciate all of you for being here each week. Let's keep it going. Let's get into another very interesting organized crime topic. And over the years, we know the state of New Jersey has always held sway in the Mafia world, whether it's the Genovese Crime Family, a group that operate on their own, or the various 5 families who have factions in New Jersey. Today, we're going to talk about one of them. And we're going to talk about a very powerful man in the New Jersey faction of the Genovese Crime Family. The story of ruthless and vicious Tino Fiumara. Next on the Sit Down. Tino Fiumara was born on August 11th, 1941, in and around the New Jersey city of Newark. Now, Newark is obviously one of the bigger cities in New Jersey, and is very close to New York City, just a hop, skip, and a jump away. And in and around Newark, there is a section called Ironbound, a.k.a. Down Neck. Now, there was a various amount of Italians and Sicilians in and around Down Neck from really the 30s into the 80s. Now, if you've ever seen The Sopranos, Tony Soprano was actually from Down Neck. In fact, early in the show, there was an episode titled Down Neck, and that's where Tony's father, Johnny Boy, that's where his uncle Corrado, it's where all of them kind of came up, and they ran operations in and around Down Neck. Now, Tino Fiumara's family were Sicilian. It was said that Tino came from Messina, an area of northeastern Sicily, not far from really the tip of Italy, which as we know, is kind of the boot on the little island that looks like it's being kicked. That's Sicily. Now, Tino Fiumara did have a pretty kind of connected family, not really his parents or anything, his father most notably, but it was said that his cousin, a person called Anthony Pucciarello, he would ultimately become a made member of the Mafia. And into the 70s, 80s, and 90s, Pucciarello was one of his main men in his crew. Now, it was also said that Tino Fiumara had a very famous distant relative. It would come out in the late 2000s while he was making gubernatorial runs in New Jersey that Chris Christie was actually distantly related to Tino Fiumara. In fact, in 2009, New York Times reported that Chris Christie was a step-nephew to Fiumara's older brother, John Fiumara. Now, Chris Christie would down the road tell the New York Times that he first learned about his relation to Tino Fiumara when he was 15. And that at one point there was a family gathering of some point, and that's where he met Tino Fiumara for the first time. Now, the New York Times did do some further investigation into Tino Fiumara and Chris Christie's relationship. In fact, weirdly, in 1991, Chris Christie would visit Tino Fiumara in Fort Worth Federal Prison, which kind of you have to wonder what was that about and why was he sent to meet Tino Fiumara? We'll talk about why Tino was in prison, but definitely a very interesting revelation. Now, Christie would kind of downplay it and that it was just for his distant relative, Uncle John, but there wasn't much kind of else said about it. Tino would die several years later, so we really didn't hear much more about it. But Chris Christie, a definite relative of Tino Fiumara. Chris Christie, I believe, is Italian on his mother's side, as far as we know. Now, Tino Fiumara would first be arrested near his 20th birthday in and around 1961. According to newspaper records, Fiumara would be arrested for assault. He would ultimately serve about 17 months in state prison. Now, Tino Fiumara would first become connected with the Mafia in Down Neck under Bruno Scarfo crime family captain Tony Bananas Caponegro. As we know, Philadelphia has had a power base in Newark for years. And in fact, under Angelo Bruno and down the road under Nicky Scarfo, Caponegro was essentially the boss of Newark, most notably Down Neck for the Bruno Scarfo crime family. Caponegro had a lieutenant under him, a person called Dominic Luciano. That was the first connection that Tino Fiumara was said to have in organized crime in and around the 1960s. Now, by that point, Fiumara wanted more out of his life. He began hanging around the port of Newark. There's one thing that can be said, in fact, two things that can be said about Tino Fiumara. I've often said on this show, if you can become a big earner as well as a very feared and ruthless individual, you will go very far in the Mafia. In fact, most of the people that have become bosses, underbosses, very high-ranking people in these families, they are both. They are not just one. You can get very far being one of the two, but you go even further being both ruthless and a good earner. Fiumara was both. He was also a natural leader. At one point, it was said that as an early young hood, he was making a name for himself as a, quote, vicious enforcer, according to government paperwork. Now, according to this paperwork I have right here, one of the first murders that Tino Fiumara was involved in was taking out a rival with a piano wire in and around Paterson, New Jersey. It was also said that Fiumara was the main gunman in a triple homicide in 1967. It was said that at a bar in Newark, three individuals, two brothers called Pasquale and Nick Colucci, as well as a man called Peter Martello, were whacked over some sort of issue on the docks. Now, Colucci, the both brothers were involved on the docks, and Tino Fiumara was never brought in this case, though through government paperwork, it was said he was the main suspect in this Jersey bar gang slaying. Another murder, it was said that Mr. Fiumara was said to be involved in was in 1969, a numbers boss in and around Paterson, New Jersey called Bobby Harris was whacked and dumped in Kearny, New Jersey. Now, Bobby Harris is an interesting name due to the fact that he was a big-time numbers boss in the black communities of the 1st and 4th wards in Paterson, New Jersey. This guy was said to be kind of the quasi-black numbers boss of that area. In fact, he was very giving to civic associations. He was big in helping the poor, and he was one of the main and prominent figures in the black community in the 4th ward. It was said that money was no issue to Bobby Harris and that he had also served in World War II. From what we understand, Mr. Harris was robbed out by the Genovese crime family due to the fact that he was dipping into the mob's collections and ignoring warnings that he needed to stay out of a certain area. So it said that they instructed Tino Fiumara to take out Bobby Harris. What are we starting to hear here? Now, keep in mind, Tino Fiumara is in his late 20s. He's possibly by this point involved in up to 5 hits. So this guy was very trusted, very respected, and he was vicious, ruthless, and depraved. He not only was whacking people with a gun, he was using piano wire. He was doing what he had to do to make his presence felt. Now, as I mentioned before, his first involvement in organized crime came under the Bruno Scarfa regime of Newark. However, after his mentor, Dominic Luciano, was whacked, he got into some sort of beef with several brothers that were operating in Newark, the Campisi brothers. It was said that Dominic Luciano got involved with one of the wives of these people, and he was taken out. Now, according to, and I urge everyone, we've had Scott Ditchy on this show before, in his book, and I should have, it's in that shelf over there. According to Garden State Gangland, Ditchy reports that, and I urge everyone to go to get that book. If you like New Jersey organized crime, very good book. And I'm going to mention another one here as well. Ditchy says that Fiumara began to become enraged due to the fact that he believes that Luciano would not have been killed without the go-ahead from Caponegro. We all know Caponegro is a very manipulative individual. And it's funny because down the road, he would be manipulated by members of the Genovese family in taking out Angelo Bruno. But Fiumara was incensed that Caponegro did this. And remember, he's not a made man at this point. So he kind of asks for like some sort of transfer, and he's transferred to the Genovese Crime Family. By that point, the chief on the docks in the Genovese family was Gerardo Jerry Catena. Now, Catena had a Kappa regime or a soldier under him called Peter Lodi Pete LaPlaca. Now, it was also said that LaPlaca at one point was in the crew of Catena's brother, Gene. Gene dies in the late 60s. Jerry Catena goes to jail in the early 70s. Lodi Pete LaPlaca takes over the Catena crew. Now, Catena in his own right by this point was in his 60s. LaPlaca was in his 60s, his late 60s by this point. And, I mean, he was born in the early 1900s. So LaPlaca was a guy who was getting to the point where he needed someone very trusted under him to take over his rackets, and that was absolutely Tino Fiumara. Now, Peter LaPlaca was a trusted hitter in his own right, and a very rich individual and a rich businessman. He came up under Willie Moretti. LaPlaca was made way back in the mid-40s, so all very trusted people in the Genovese family in and around New Jersey. Now, eventually, Tino Fiumara would become a made member of the Mafia in 1976 when the books opened. Also made alongside Fiumara in 76 was waterfront kingpin John DiGilio, as well as Venero Benny Eggs Mangano. As we know, Benny Eggs was a trusted Chin Gigante confidant. So things are good. Fiumara is making his presence felt on the Newark waterfront. He's making a bunch of money through his affiliation with the ILA, the International Longshoremen's Association, and he is a trusted hitter. Now, for Fiumara, things become very interesting by his making ceremony, 1976 and in 1977. I want to discuss a very interesting New Jersey State Police in tandem with the FBI operation that was called Project Alpha. Now, I want to kind of talk about a relationship I recently forged with Bob Delaney. Bob sent me his book, A Covert. I'm actually going to interview him in a few weeks. We're just trying to pin down a date. Bob also was gracious in sending me a bunch of paperwork that he had in tandem with this investigation. For anyone that doesn't know who Bob Delaney is, Bob is a former New Jersey state policeman, and we'll get into his operation. He down the road would be a very respected NBA official. Here he can be seen with the late Kobe Bryant. He kind of has had a super interesting life. Bob Delaney was, in his early years, a state policeman who went undercover. He then retires, and in the late 80s decides, I'm going to get into refereeing. He becomes an NBA ref, and now he is a speaker, and he's written a bunch of other books. And I really enjoyed it. I had about an hour conversation with Bob last week, and I got to tell you, it was super cool. And we'll discuss some of the things that Bob told me about Tino Fiumara in a bit. But this is Bob Delaney in the mid-'70s. Now, the state police, as I said, in tandem with the FBI, would set up a company called Alamo Transportation Company, which was about 10 minutes from the New Jersey Newark port. Now, the goal for them was to engage in contracts and essentially hope that the Mafia attempts to take control of Alamo Trucking and they can get them on extortion and all sorts of charges. Now, what we would learn from this investigation was super interesting. Eventually, Alamo Transportation Company would get their first contract, and it would be a company called Frigid Express, which was run by Genovese made man Pasquale Patty Macchiaroli. Now, who in turn, he would connect them, Alamo Transport Company, with Tino Fiumara, John DiGilio, and Jackie DiNasorcio. Now, I want to kind of discuss the various roles that these individuals had on the waterfront. Tino Fiumara, according to Bob Delaney's paperwork, as we know, was part of the Genovese Crime Family, and he controlled the port of Newark and the unions working there, most notably the ILA and other sections of Newark. Now, Tino would ultimately also be represented by one of his main proteges, Mikey Cigars Coppola. Now, also involved in the waterfront at that point was John DiGilio, who was also part of the Genovese Crime Family. They would control parts of Jersey City as well as Bayonne, New Jersey. Now, also on the port, as I said, was Jackie DiNasorcio. He was from the Bruno Scarfo crime family, and they had an organized crime group that controlled a person called Patrick Kelly. Patrick Kelly was a CI who was also part of Project Alpha, and he was locked in with the DiNasorcio. Now, I want to make this clear. By this point in the mid-'60s, DiNasorcio is actually in Rahway State Prison. However, he is still conducting his operations through Patrick Kelly and people in the Bruno Scarfo crime family. Now, I want to discuss some of the things that Bob Delaney and his pals start to find out about Tino Fiumara and the people on the dock. According to this paperwork as well, everyone involved that I just mentioned, all three, DiNasorcio, Fiumara, and Delaney, are all getting a portion each month on the take from Alamo Trucking. Now, Alamo began paying off Fiumara, DiGilio, and DiNasorcio in payments equal to approximately 25% of the company's weekly profits by 1977, which will come to a total of about $2,500 a week during reasonably productive periods. Now, payouts sometimes would drop as low as a total of $1,500, but they would rise at some points to peak periods of $3,500. Now, keep in mind, this is per week. So on occasion, the guys are receiving about $10,000 a month just from Alamo Trucking. And what this is doing for people like Bob Delaney and the New Jersey State Police and the FBI is making it very clear that eventually this group will try to completely overtake the company. Now, according to Bob Delaney as well, there was another portion of the conversation to which DiGilio has a conversation with not only Patrick Kelly, but other members of the ILA. DiGilio would say at one point, quote, between me and Tino, me over here, Tino over there, referring to his contact with the ILA and Tino's contracts in the ILA and Down Neck, through both of these men, we could have more than enough work. Now, DiGilio would go on to say that, quote, I can give you my strength. And that also that he can use all his contacts, reiterating, saying, I can only function in one way here. You guys got to do the rest. I can't get behind a desk and start dispatching trucks. DeGilio would also say that he's going to make us not only one of the biggest trucking companies in the state, but one of the biggest in the country through he and Fiumara's contacts. And they would do that through paying off and extorting other companies and monopolizing their work so that Alamo Trucking could get all the work. Now, in turn, again, they're building their investigation here through undercover contacts like Bob Delaney. Now, what we would also learn through this fascinating investigation is that it wasn't just trucking money that these three were trying to extort from Alamo Trucking. At one point, Jack DiNosorcio makes a bizarre request. Now, while in Rahway State Prison, he would send word through one of his enforcers called Woody Brown. Now, Woody Brown would approach Bob Delaney and members of the state police and say that he wanted his wife, Marlene, 2 children, and his mother to have a vacation at Disney World, to which he wanted Alamo Transportation to pay for all of it. Now, Bob Delaney would send back word that the answer was, quote, no. Now, Woody Brown, who was DiNosorcio's enforcer, who was, quote, a big man physically, he came to me with Jackie's latest message, the point of which that I should change my mind and have Alamo Transportation pay for his family's vacation. Now, Alamo did pay for most of the vacation at a cost of $1,500. Now, this is the conversation. Brown would say, we need the money for the travel agency. We got the credit, come back over to here. Now, Patrick Kelly would say that the tickets were nearly $1,350. Now, Kelly would ask what would happen if Alamo didn't pay for the vacation. And he would instruct that Tino Fiumara would pay them a visit, and that DeGilio and Fiumara would, quote, shut down the business of Alamo Transportation. So again, forcing people to do things, and if they don't and don't comply, their businesses are going to go kaput. And probably a lot worse is going to happen too. We see the influence that Mr. Fiumara had in this business. Now, similarly, Tino Fiumara felt that he not only controlled Alamo, but that wasn't enough for him. He wanted more. Tino Fiumara allegedly billed Alamo Transportation for appliances which he had purchased for a bar and restaurant that he controlled. Alamo received the bill for a soil test performed on Fiumara's lawn, and Tino demanded that Alamo dispatch truck drivers to his home on weekends where they would do jobs such as yard work and building a barbecue grill in his backyard. Alamo went along with Tino's demands because the company, quote, had no choice. Now, according to Delaney, our assignment was to do business as if they were another firm. Once a businessman found himself this deeply involved with mob figures, there was no turning back. Now, both Fiumara and DeGilio both had a no-show job on the payroll of Alamo, and that DeGilio's men, as well as Fiumara's man on the docks, a person called Raymond Tango, were each paid $150 a week. Now, they did not work for the company, and their job was to just collect and cash paychecks. Fiumara and DeGilio also had a, quote, watchdog employee on the Alamo payroll, and these workers were there to keep an eye on how things were going and what they were planning to do. So essentially what Fiumara was doing, it was making Alamo Transportation his own personal bank account. People want jobs, they'll give it to you. I need work done on my house, they'll do it for him. I need appliances built, they'll do it. He was making them his slaves, essentially. And he was taking a bunch of money off the top. The problem for Tino Fiumara was, and this is a pretty big problem, this was all a operation by the FBI and the New Jersey State Police as an undercover. Now, not only did Fiumara control a lot of influence on the dock, but he also had a vast gambling and loan sharking operation in and around Newark, as well as owned bar, restaurants, and other businesses. Now, I do want to discuss an interesting thing that would turn up. In November of 1978, an East Side High School, Newark, New Jersey principal called James Quelly Jr. would be found dead. in his driveway of his home. Now, ballistics on the weapon determined that the weapon used in the murder of Quelly was also involved in 3 other gangland slayings tied to the Genovese crime family. Now, I bring this up due to the fact that one of the people whacked with this gun that was also used in the principal hit was a person connected to John DiGilio. And it's also common knowledge that James Quelly was a boyhood friend of Tino Fiumara and that they often played handball at a local gym. Now, when Quelly's body was discovered, he had nearly $2,000 in cash as well as betting slips on him. Now, it was also said that various taverns and restaurants that were fronts as bookmaking operations often called the high school looking for Quelly. Now, we can surmise that some of the bookmakers were under control of Tino Fiumara and that Fiumara may have ordered this hit. So, again, just an important thing to turn up. I found this. I found it interesting. There were a lot of connections to Tino. The thing about Fiumara is he can't be brought on anything. He has still done very little jail time in his life. This is now possibly 5 or 6 bodies this guy has. Still haven't brought him on any serious charges. However, that would end. In and around 1979, Tino Fiumara would be arrested on labor racketeering as well as extortion charges, and that had ties back to the Project Alpha case with Bob Delaney and the New Jersey State Police. Tino Fiumara would ultimately be hit with a nearly 15-year prison sentence. So not only did the New Jersey State Police and Bob Delaney tie down Fiumara, but they got a bunch of other people arrested as well. As I said, Bob Delaney would ultimately go on to become a referee in the NBA. I do want to urge you to go check out this book. This is one of my favorite mob books. Bob is a great guy. And he tells a really unbelievable story in this book. As I said, we're going to have Bob on really soon, and I'm really looking forward to an interview with Bob Delaney. So Fiumara heads off to prison, and he has to understand that, he's going to miss the entire 80s, and he does. He doesn't get out until 1994. And as I said, he has that meeting weirdly with Chris Christie in 1991 when Christie's a young guy. Now, on the street, as I said, the person that ferried messages, because remember, throughout his nearly 15-year prison sentence, Tino Fiumara continues to hold sway in the Genovese crime family over the port. His main people on the streets are Michael Coppola, as well as a man called Lawrence Ricci. Also, his cohorts included Lawrence Little Larry Dentico, Michael Borelli, and Stevie Beach DePiro. Now, Coppola would act as the acting capo regime for Tino Fiumara. Now, Fiumara would be released in and around 1994, and he would head right back to the streets in control of not only the ILA, but the entire New Jersey waterfront. This guy made a shit ton of money, and he had an incredible sway. And remember, we don't think enough, and we don't talk enough about the New Jersey influence, most notably with the Genovese crime family. They had all sorts of power in New Jersey, whether it was DiGilio, whether it was Fiumara, whether it was Bobby Manna. These guys had tons of power and influence over some of the most powerful and big ports on the Eastern Seaboard. Fiumara ultimately would move to Long Island in an attempt to keep himself, how do we say it, a little bit more secret. He was tired of being in prison and would not only live on Long Island, but he would ferry his messages through Stevie Beach DePiro. By this point, Michael Coppola is on the run. He would go on the run for about a decade. So DePiro would kind of take over his operations and be the messenger of sorts for Tino Fiumara. Issue, though, presented itself in 1999. Even for being careful and being paranoid, it didn't help. In 1999, Tino Fiumara would be sent back to prison, after he violated supervised release requirements, and he would remain in prison till around 2003. Now, one issue Fiumara would face as he came out of jail for another time was Lawrence Ricci. Now, Ricci by this point was a powerful member of his crew, and he held a lot of sway over the docks as well. Lawrence Ricci gets some sort of ILA labor racketeering case in and around that time. And he is insistent, Ricci, on going to trial. He believes he can beat the case. So he's insistent. I'm going to go to trial. I'm going to go to trial. I'm going to go to trial. The trial would happen in 2005, but Ricci didn't turn up. So he's reported missing. It's been alleged that the Genovese crime family did not want Mr. Ricci to go to trial. They wanted him to plead guilty and go to prison. They felt like it would look bad, him sitting on trial with members of the ILA, and it just wouldn't look right. So Ricci turns up dead. In fact, his body was found 6 weeks later in a car in the parking lot of a diner in Union, New Jersey. Now, I want to make this clear. The person that whacked Mr. Ricci has never been charged, though government records indicate that the main suspect while on the run was Michael Coppola. Now, I want to make it clear. Mr. Coppola, was not charged in this. However, the FBI believed on orders of Tino Fiumara, he took out Lawrence Ricci. Now, Mikey Coppola in 2009 would be put on trial for bodies as well as racketeering and extorting Local 1235 of the ILA for over 30 years. He would eventually be sentenced under John Gleason to 16 years in prison and was released in 2022. But the shot to take him out for good and put him in prison for good on murder charges did fall through, and he was never charged with any murder. Now, Tino Fiumara would continue operating as a high-ranking member of the Genovese Crime Family. In fact, by the late 2000s, he would be added to a ruling panel of the Genovese Crime Family. They included guys like Fiumara, Daniel Danny the Lion Leo, Arthur Nigro, and Quiet Dom Cirillo. All these guys kind of ran in unison the Genovese Crime Family. Now, Fiumara had health problems, and by 2010, cancer had overtaken him. Tino Fiumara would die in September 2010 at the age of 69 years old. Now, interestingly enough, a longtime lawyer would state, quote, "I don't know that he actually passed away." Now, the lawyer would say that I heard he's dead, but my gut tells me that he is not. It would be right up his alley to pull a stunt like this, recalling that he often would travel in the trunks of cars to avoid the watchful eye of the law. Now, according to Jerry Capisci, a spokesman for Huntington Hospital, which is where Fiumara lived on Long Island, confirmed that he had died in September of 2010 and that he was laid to rest at Moravian Cemetery on Staten Island. Now, the same source would say that, quote, he went very quickly. He went to the hospital, and within 2 weeks, he died. So there was a thought that maybe Fiumara faked his own death because that's just the kind of guy. He was a very secretive guy. Fiumara really acted as like a Gomorrah boss. We've all seen the show Gomorrah, where Pietro Savastano he would sit in the trunks of cars. He would go through alleys to avoid, people finding him. Fiumara did a lot of time in prison, and he didn't want to do any more time in prison. So he would go to long lengths to keep himself out of jail. When we look back on Fiumara, I really don't know that there's a more ruthless person in at least New Jersey as far as someone connected to the mafia. When I had a conversation with Bob Delaney a week or so ago, I actually asked him, I said, Bob, in all your investigations, all the people you met, and he was around a lot of mobsters, before I could even get the question out, and I knew he would say Fiumara immediately. Tino Fiumara, 100%. Fiumara was not only a big earner, he was a leader. He was a person that people in the family respected a whole hell of a lot. And he was a very ruthless individual. And I think it was clear from the beginning that the guy they called the good looking guy, he was always going to be very powerful. It was kind of dead set for him. We have to ask ourselves, if he doesn't get those supervised release violations and goes back to prison for a couple of years, remember, Giganti goes to prison. We obviously know that he handpicks Palomo to be his next successor, but Fiumara definitely could have had a high job as well. Maybe would have been on the administration and was part of the ruling body, quite frankly. A very powerful guy that a lot of people just don't mention. I think when we look at top 5 New Jersey mobsters of all time, he has to be in the top 5, surely. Now, obviously, you're going to have other people in there as well, but Fiumara held sway for a long time. I mean, this guy was around since like the early 60s till 2010. I mean, that's 50 years. Held sway over the ILA. Very powerful guy. Yeah, I think this will kind of be a tandem show, and down the road we'll talk to Bob Delaney and hear much more. So look forward to that down the road. I thank everybody for watching, as always, for listening, as always. And I want to again extend my thank you to all of you. I always say this: if you have someone you think might enjoy the show, please tell them about it. The easiest way for us to grow is through spoken word. And I've had so many people reach out and say, "Hey, I heard about the show from someone else," and it's pretty cool. So I hope you enjoy it, and I hope you tell people about it. Go support our friends at Pravada Cigar Club. Get some sit-down cigars. The weather's getting nicer. I know today it's like 75 outside, which is cool. It's the first really nice day in a long time. So spring is here. Spring is sprung, as they said, or as they say. Thanks, everybody, for watching. We'll see you next week here on the Sit Down.